There is a kind of town that exists in America where nothing bad ever happens. Plainfield, Wisconsin was exactly that kind of town. 700 people, one main street. Everybody knew everybody. If you sneezed on Monday morning, 3 neighbors had already brought you soup by Monday afternoon. Crime? What crime? The most serious thing that happened in Plainfield most weeks was an argument about whose apple pie won at the county fair. People left their doors unlocked at night. Children played outside until the streetlights came on. Nobody worried. Nobody had a reason to. This was a place where life moved slowly and sweetly, like honey off a spoon. But on the evening of November 16th, 1957, that sweetness ended forever. And Plainfield would never be the same again. Frank Warden finished his shift as deputy sheriff and drove toward his mother's hardware store. He did this almost every evening. His mother, Bernice Warden, ran the only hardware store in town. She was a reliable woman, steady, always there. The store opened every morning at the same time. It closed every evening at the same time. Bernice Warden did not do surprises. But as Frank pulled up that evening, something immediately felt wrong. The closed sign was hanging in the window. Too early. Way too early. Frank sat in his car for a moment, staring at that sign. The door was unlocked though, so he stepped inside. The store was dark and completely silent. And then he saw the floor. Dark red bloodstains spread across the old wooden boards. One of the rifles from the display rack had been removed and placed elsewhere. And near the back door, there were drag marks in the dust. Long, wide, deliberate. Someone had been dragged out of this store. Frank's mother was gone. He grabbed his radio immediately and called Sheriff Arthur Schley. On December 8th, 1954, Ed Gein walked into a tavern in town. The owner was a woman named Mary Hogan. Middle-aged, sturdy, her face reminded Ed of his mother. It was after closing time. The bar was empty except for the two of them. Mary turned her back for just a moment. Ed shot her in the head with his pistol. He put her in his truck and drove home. Back in Plainfield, Mary Hogan's disappearance caused a stir. Police investigated for a long time, but nobody looked twice at Ed Gein. He continued walking through town, nodding hello, fixing fences, buying antifreeze at the hardware store. Completely invisible. The drive was short, but it felt long. Gein's farmhouse sat far from everything, surrounded by dead fields and bare trees. The kind of place that makes you feel watched, even when no one is around. They pulled up slowly. Ed's truck was not there. They shouted his name. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The front door was open, so they stepped inside. The smell hit them first. It was so thick, so wrong, so deeply unnatural that Sheriff Schley stumbled backward out of the doorway and was violently sick in the yard. Frank Warden pressed his sleeve against his face and forced himself to stay. They clicked on their flashlights and walked deeper into the darkness. What they found that night was beyond any nightmare either man had ever had. Human skulls sat on shelves. Some were untouched. Others had been reshaped and used as ordinary bowls. The lampshades were not made of fabric. The chair seat was not made of leather. Everything in that house was made of human skin and bone. Gloves sewn from the skin of human hands sat neatly folded in a drawer. A belt was crafted from human body parts. The 4 bedposts were topped with real human skulls. And in the corner of the room, there were masks. Not Halloween masks, not costume masks. Masks made from actual human faces, carefully removed, dried, preserved. Sheriff Schley picked one up and looked closely. He recognized her. It was the face of Mary Hogan, a woman who had disappeared 3 years ago in 1954. Her case had never been solved, until right now. In the kitchen, body parts were boiling on the stovetop. The refrigerator held organs from multiple victims. And then Frank Warden walked to the shed out back. The shed door creaked open. Frank raised his light slowly. Hanging from the rafters, upside down, tied by the ankles like a deer after a hunt, was a headless human body. Frank recognized his mother's clothing. A burlap sack sat nearby on the ground. Inside the sack was his mother's head. Frank Warden had been a law enforcement officer for years. He had seen accidents. He had delivered bad news to families. But nothing in any training or any experience prepares a son for this. Bernice Warden had done nothing wrong. She had opened her store every morning. She had helped her neighbors. She had raised her son right. And she had ended up here, in a monster shed, because she had the misfortune of running a hardware store that Ed Gein walked into that morning. Frank Warden fell apart. More officers had arrived at the scene. They were still moving carefully through the farmhouse when headlights appeared on the dirt road outside. Everyone went still. Ed Gein's pickup truck rolled to a stop. He climbed out slowly. He looked at the police cars and showed absolutely no surprise. No panic, no guilt, no attempt to run. He just stood there, quiet and still, like a man who had come home to find guests in his living room. Officers moved immediately. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Ed Gein went quietly. He even smiled a little. At the police station, Ed Gein sat across the table from investigators and said nothing. 1 hour passed. 10 hours. 20 hours. 30 hours of complete silence. And then, in a soft, almost childlike voice, Ed Gein made a request. He wanted apple pie, with cheddar cheese on top. The officers looked at each other. Someone went and got him the pie. Ed ate every single bite. He wiped his mouth carefully with a napkin, and then he started talking. He admitted to shooting Mary Hogan in 1954. He admitted to shooting Bernice Warden in 1957. He admitted to digging up 9 graves at the local cemetery and bringing the bodies home. Every body had been a woman's. He described everything calmly, clearly, without a single tear, like he was describing a weekend project. To understand what Ed Gein became, you have to understand where Ed Gein began. Because monsters are not born, they are made. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He had a father named George, a mother named Augusta, and an older brother named Henry. On paper, it was a family. In reality, it was a trap. His father, George, was a violent alcoholic who came home drunk and took his rage out on whoever was nearest. His wife, his children, it made no difference to George Gein. His mother, Augusta, was deeply religious. Not the warm, peaceful kind of religious, the cold, fearful, angry kind. She hated men, including her own husband, including, in her darkest moments, her own sons. When she was pregnant with Ed, she prayed every night for a daughter. When Ed was born instead, she looked at her newborn baby boy and said, "God must be punishing me for something I did in another life." That baby grew up hearing words like that, every single day. Augusta Gein decided the world was evil. Not just parts of it, all of it. She moved the family to an isolated farmhouse at the edge of Plainfield. She did not want her sons mixing with other children. She wanted them completely dependent on her. Every day she read them the Bible for hours. Not the hopeful parts, the parts about hellfire and sinners burning. She told Ed every outside woman was corrupt and sinful. She told him only she could keep him safe. And Ed, with no other voice in his life, believed every word. At school, he had no friends. He was bullied constantly. When he came home broken, his mother offered nothing. After 8th grade, Ed stopped going to school, and his world shrank down to almost nothing. The years passed. Ed stayed on the farm. He did odd jobs around town. He fixed windows and patched fences. People thought he was harmless, simple, nothing to worry about. In 1940, his father George died of alcoholism. Ed felt very little. In 1944, his brother Henry died during a brush fire while the two were clearing land together. The official cause was smoke inhalation, but Henry had injuries on his head that were never properly investigated. Henry had recently started speaking critically of their mother, something Ed could not stand. The case was closed without a real investigation. And then came the death that broke everything. In December 1945, Ed Gein suffered a stroke and died. Ed was 39 years old. He had no friends, no relationship, no identity that existed separately from his mother. She had been his entire world, and now she was gone. Ed Gein sealed off his mother's rooms and left them exactly as they were. He moved into a tiny space near the kitchen and sat with the silence. The whispers started slowly. He began to believe his mother was speaking to him from beyond death. He would sit in her empty room for hours and talk back to the darkness. 18 months after Augusta's death, in the middle of a cold night, Ed Gein grabbed a shovel and walked to the cemetery. He found his mother's grave and started digging. His hands did not shake. If anything, they moved with terrible purpose. He opened the coffin and felt, for the first time since her death, something like peace. He brought her skull back to the farmhouse. He sat beside it and talked to it every day. But it was not enough. He missed her presence, her physical being, and so a terrible idea formed in his shattered mind. He would build a suit made of human skin, a suit he could wear, a suit that would let him feel like his mother was still with him. He went back to the cemetery again and again. 9 graves in total, always women, always roughly his mother's age and build. He removed their skin carefully, dried it, stitched it together with slow, horrifying patience. On moonlit nights, he put the suit on and danced alone in the dark outside his farmhouse, believing in his broken mind that he had become his mother. On December 8, 1954, Ed Gein walked into a tavern in town. The owner was a woman named Mary Hogan. Middle-aged, sturdy, her face reminded Ed of his mother. It was after closing time. The bar was empty except for the two of them. Mary turned her back for just a moment. Ed shot her in the head with his pistol. He put her in his truck and drove home. Back in Plainfield, Mary Hogan's disappearance caused a stir. Police investigated for a long time, but nobody looked twice at Ed Gein. He continued walking through town, nodding hello, fixing fences, buying antifreeze at the hardware store. Completely invisible. Ed Gein was brought before the court. Every person in that courtroom wanted to look into the eyes of the man who had done these things. But his behavior in court was so bizarre, so disconnected from reality, that the judge ordered a full psychiatric evaluation before any verdict could be reached. A team of doctors spent weeks evaluating Ed Gein. Their conclusion was clear. Ed Gein suffered from severe schizophrenia. This is a mental illness that causes hallucinations, meaning he saw and heard things that were not real. He genuinely, completely believed that his dead mother spoke to him. He was not faking. He was not performing. His mind had completely separated from reality years ago. Doctors also identified necrophilic tendencies in him. Based on all of this, the court ruled Ed Gein legally insane. He was sent to a psychiatric institution rather than a prison. In 1968, when doctors believed he had stabilized enough, he was finally tried properly. The verdict was not guilty by reason of insanity. He remained in the institution for the rest of his life. Ed Gein died on July 26, 1984. He was 77 years old. The people of Plainfield tried to move on. Locals burned Ed Gein's farmhouse to the ground before it could draw curious strangers. His truck was sold at auction. People paid money just to stand beside it. The world, it seemed, could not look away. And Hollywood was watching. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock released Psycho. Norman Bates, the soft-spoken mama's boy who could not let his mother go, was directly inspired by Ed Gein. In 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre introduced the world to Leatherface, a killer who wore human faces. In 1991, The Silence of the Lambs gave us Buffalo Bill, a murderer who wanted to sew himself a suit of human skin. Three of the most terrifying fictional monsters ever created, all rooted in one real man from a small town in Wisconsin. Ed Gein was not born a monster. He was born a baby, a helpless, innocent child. What was done to him, day after day, year after year, was a slow and deliberate destruction of a human being. His mother denied him love. She denied him friendship. She denied him any identity that existed outside of her. She used religion as a weapon and isolation as a cage. None of this excuses a single thing Ed Gein did. Nothing excuses it. Nothing justifies it. Nothing makes it acceptable. But it explains it. And explanations matter. Because if we understand how a person can be broken so completely, we have a better chance of recognizing the warning signs before another family becomes a headline. The most dangerous people do not always look dangerous. Sometimes they look like the quiet neighbor who fixes your fence, who waves hello on Sunday mornings, who nods politely in the hardware store, who nobody ever suspects. That is the lesson Plainfield, Wisconsin learned on November 16, 1957. And it is a lesson the world has never forgotten.